Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first official lecture. We had our introduction lecture yesterday. As of this morning, I can see that some of you watched it. Thank you. As always, please reach out if you have any questions. So the plan for today is I'm going to do actually two lectures, and I know that sounds like a lot. I promise it's actually the only day that we'll do two lectures. At least that are lectures. Some days we'll have a lecture and then a stats piece. But just to sort of set the table, because we're moving so quickly, I wanted to spend today talking about what IO psychology is, and also a kind of a brief overview of IO psychology research methods. Some of that content, the research methods piece, is probably going to be a review for you, but I want to make sure that we're all just speaking the same language, on the same page. That way we can go into more advanced stuff later and everyone will know what's happening. But that'll be two videos. I'll, as always, send out an email with the links to those. But without further ado, let's get into what IO psychology is. And I realized I didn't share my screen. I'm gonna share my screen right now. Yes, cool. Here we are. So some of you may have taken Psych 381, or the Psychology of Work Behavior. Many of you, I suspect, have not. Half of this class, like we talked about in the intro video, is kind of just content lecture on different IO psychology topics. Half of this class is really focused on your research project and giving you the tools you need to do that. So to set the stage for all of this, and your research project will be on an IO topic. I'll get to that a little bit later here, but in a couple days. So the plan for today is I want to, for those of you that don't know, and many people don't, tell you what IO psychology or industrial or organizational psychology is, how it developed as a field. We'll do a little bit of the history there because I actually think it's really pretty cool. And we'll focus on what do IO psychologists do? Where do we work and how do you become one? And if you're sitting there thinking, I have never heard of this before, that's totally fine. I know plenty of other people who have their PhDs in psychology that have barely heard of IO psychology. We're kind of a niche field, but we're growing very, very quickly. Just for some context, we have 26, 27 faculty that are tenure track full-time at Radford in the psychology department, and 4 of us are IO psychologists. We have a master's program that takes in about 10 students a year. It's a 2-year program, and so people know about it, and it's getting more popular, but it's still worth taking some time to explain what it is. So if you think back to Psych 101, this should be review, hopefully. Psychology is the science of human behavior. IO psychology, then, is the science of human behavior at work. If you want to think of it this way, we take a lot of things that exist in psychology and just study them in the workplace context because, as you all probably know, we behave differently in different settings. The way I behave at home is different than how I behave at work. Unless I'm teaching online, then I'm at home and everything feels the same. But not only are we kind of stealing from other areas of psychology and applying it to the workplace, we're also looking at what can a workplace do to help people. So on one hand, we focus on the efficiency or productivity of organizations. We call this the industrial or the I side. And with this, what we look at is how can we hire the best people for a job? How can we appraise them properly? How can we tell if they're doing a good job or not? And kind of at the core of this, how can we even tell what a job is supposed to be? Some of you may have had the experience where you apply for a job, you look at a job description, and what you do has nothing to do with that description. Some of you may look at a job description and be like, this is exactly what I'm doing. Some of you may have gotten appraised at a job. You sit down with your manager oftentimes and they tell you what you're doing well, what you're doing poorly. And some of you hopefully have gotten hired or hopefully not gotten fired from jobs. A lot of times some of this decision making is pretty poor, right? You don't know quite why stuff is happening. What IO psychologists do is we implement science and data-backed ways to do this. So the first 3 lectures after this are going to cover those I side topics, and then we'll get into the O side topics. These are less focused on efficiency, and they're more focused on the health and well-being of employees. So we're going to cover topics like employee motivation. How can you motivate employees? How can you be a more motivated employee? We'll talk about job attitudes and where those come from. Do I like my job? Do I hate my job? Why or why not? We'll talk about productive and counterproductive behaviors in the workplace. We'll talk about leadership. We'll talk about organizational culture. And we'll talk about health psychology as it relates to work. One of the reasons why I really like being an IO psychologist and why I'm generally really excited about talking about these things is they're science-based. We're not just saying, oh, let's try this at work and see what happens. One thing that always drives me crazy is managers who, when they're talking about interviewing, say, I can hire the best person, I just have a really good feel for people. Chances are, even if that's true, which it often isn't, you could still do better, right? Everyone, we think of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? If you remember social psychology, if you took it, it's this idea that we think we're all above average at just about everything. Applied here, most people think they're better interviewers or better judges of character than the average bear. If you think about, we'll talk about this in research methods, by definition, not everyone can be above average. So what we do is we apply science-based approaches to reducing human error and biases in some of these things. It's great. We not only develop this stuff, but then we apply it. I would say IO psychology is a very applied area of psychology. You learn about this stuff, you develop this stuff, then you get to go out and do it. Like I said, we're growing. The Bureau of Labor Statistics comes out with its fastest growing occupations list every year. And in the last 5 years, IO psychology has been in the top 5. A couple times a year, it's come in at number 1. Now, granted, there's only 1,600 of us or so in the US, there's more worldwide, but there's graduate programs, we're putting out more people. And I'd say the biggest thing is that companies are recognizing that IO psychologists can both, 1, make them more efficient and save them more money, and 2, help the people in the organizations. So we help at a number of levels, and there's recognition for that in our growing field. I have this slide in here. Biopsychologists made the Washington Post a while back. This was actually hilariously controversial. It's funny, there's a guy, the guy with the white hair in the picture, his name is Ed Salas, does a lot of work with the Navy. The Washington Post totally screwed up. They said, we're basically government therapists, right? We're talking to government employees about their problems, and that's not true. So I would say that we help employees, but we don't care. It's not that we don't care, but we don't or aren't trained to address their mental health or things like that. That's up to clinicians. We try to help organizations help people. So what do we do? Where do we do this, rather? A lot of times, some of your other psychology faculty may have talked about this, that some people are just researchers and teach, right? That's the college professor. I do research in leadership and organizational culture and aging in the workplace. And I obviously teach classes. I teach a bunch of classes in our master's program and in this course. But IO psychologists aren't just college professors. Unlike, say, social psychology, where most people go and get jobs as college professors, more than half of the IO psychologists end up working for companies. These can be consulting firms, they can be government roles, or they can be for private corporations. And they work with these companies to use IO science and principles to make those organizations better. So, consulting firm, a good buddy of mine works for a place called BetterUp that does leadership development. And he works with CEOs to make them better leaders. And he goes, so he works for this company, and then he goes and does works with these other individuals. One of our IO master's graduates is looking to get a job with the United States Post Office, right? So the Postal Service. That's government, or government adjacent at least, and he's working to make them more efficient. I know a bunch of people that work for the Department of Defense, either in the supply chain or there's a guy I knew who was a colonel in the Army who worked for like soldier welfare and leadership. And then you can work for private corporations. All right, my examples are a little biased because I did my grad school in Detroit. A bunch of my grad school colleagues went to go work for Ford or for GM. One of them, a woman named Amy, for example, leads Ford's worldwide engagement survey every year. So that's I say all those examples to show that IO psychologists go and do a really wide range of possible things. The thing here is, unlike, I think sometimes people think, oh, you're going to be a college professor or you're going to be a consultant, and there's no overlap. That's not true. There is overlap between the two. I am a college professor, obviously. Maybe not obviously, but I'm here in the video talking to you, so hey, I am. So I do research, I teach, and I do consulting. I consult with organizations both locally and at the national level. They come to me, they say, we have a question or we have a problem about this, and we take care of it. Similarly, some people in the consulting world spend a lot of time doing research or will still publish articles based on their consulting experiences. Finally, some people start as professors and then go work as consultants. Some people start as consultants and go work as professors. This is all to say, there's no like really clear line between research and practice. Oftentimes, IO psychologists do both. So what do we do? Here's a kind of a quick list. We recruit employees that fit jobs and organizations. We develop them and try to keep them happy so they stay. We spend a lot of time worrying about the legal system, right? We want to make sure that hiring practices that organizations use are fair, legal, and efficient. By the way, all these things that I'm listing, we're going to talk about in greater detail. So as you're looking at this list, think about what you're more interested in. Let me know. And I can guarantee we're going to spend some time going into more detail on it. We develop performance management systems. We try to minimize absenteeism, people not showing up, and counterproductive work behavior, or behavior that is counterproductive in some way to the workforce, whether that's workplace bullying or theft or things like that. And we try to eliminate harassment and discrimination in the workplace. Those are obviously negative things. They make people feel bad at work. They are costly to an organization, so we try to eliminate those. The list goes on, by the way. We do a lot. We try to maximize productivity and efficiency of employees, make people better team players, increase motivation, and that's supposed to read dedication. Identify and train leaders. Very relevant right now. We do consulting not only when organizations are growing and hiring employees, but we do consulting when they're downsizing or merging with another organization. So I have some friends that are very, very busy right now as they work with companies that need to downsize for various reasons, and we manage climate and culture. Oftentimes, so if you go on like monster.com or Indeed or any other job search site, and if you type in IO psychologist, you might not get much. Instead, we have IO psychologists take on a variety of titles. There's some organizations that have lots of pure IO psychologists. Sometimes IO psychologists work in human resources, or sometimes they end up in different areas of a business where they utilize their skills but have titles like, president, VP, director, principal, consultant of org development, talent management, workforce insights, human resources, human resource management, employee relations, and so on and so forth. These are all slightly different jobs, but they're all jobs that are often held by IO trained folks. If you go into consulting, you'll see that you can go internal or external. So if you go, let's say you get a master's degree from Radford University, you can't go on to be a professor, you need a PhD for that. It's not all it's cracked up to be, believe me. But most of our master's level students go the consulting road. Some of them become internal consultants. In this case, you work for a company and your client is that company. So if you work for Ford, all of your work is to make Ford better. So my friend Amy that works at Ford, her work is around employee engagement just with Ford employees all around the globe. Facebook has a lot of, and Google have a lot of IO psychologists actually. They call them people scientists is the job title for them. And their job is to hire and train people and hire the right people for the right types of jobs. Again, they work for Facebook or Google, but they do a variety of projects within that. So internal consultants tend to select employees, assess them, manage talent pipelines, look at performance metrics, and do sometimes like organizational development things like training or pushing new organizational policies, things of that nature. And the government roles are a subset of this. So I mentioned a guy who was looking at a post office job. We have Radford alums. One of them is in charge of personnel selection for the Secret Service, which seems really cool. I have another friend who was a professor and then went to go work in DC. She says that she can't tell me where she works, but she thinks the work is really challenging and it's around personnel selection. So she works for the CIA or the NSA. And she keeps telling me, she's like, we're hiring, you should come work for us. And part of me thinks that would be super cool, but part of me thinks that maybe I'm not a great fit to go into the CIA or the NSA for a variety of reasons, mostly that I don't like being told what to do a whole lot. So personal issue, working through it. My partner finds it very endearing, trust me. So that's internal consulting, right? We also have external consulting. This is when you work for a company and your clients are other companies that you are selling your expertise to. Oftentimes, you, as an external consultant, you're good at one or two things and you sell that service to other people. A number of years ago, I worked for a company called Dennison Consulting. Their niche, their specialty, was assessing and developing organizational culture. So that was external consulting. My clients wasn't the company that I was working for. Our clients were tons of other companies that came to us for our expertise. We worked with the University of Michigan. We worked with the Defense Logistics Agency, with British Petroleum, with small and large companies that wanted to know more about their culture. So we did this one specific thing. Sometimes these roles are more research focused. Sometimes they're delivering a product. So like we sold our organizational culture surveys and then provided individual solutions for each company based on their results. So consulting, internal or external. Let's say this sounds appealing to you. How do you become an IO psychology consultant? Well, you generally need an advanced degree. A master's in IO or a PhD in IO is a good starting place. An MBA, people with MBAs aren't IO psychologists. They're trained more broadly. They know more about accounting and finance, but they also don't know how to, IO, we really do focus on statistics a lot and using statistics appropriately. So an MBA sometimes doesn't do it. You need initial experience. So when you apply for a job, it's one thing to, if you apply for a job as a consultant or an IO psychologist, it's not enough to say, hey, I've got this degree. You have to show that you've done something with it. And that's hard. I get it. It's like applying for any job now, it's an entry-level job and it requires 6 years of experience. It doesn't make sense. I can only speak to how we handle it here at Radford with our master's program. We do client projects for free with companies around the area. They come to us or we go to them and say, we can help you. And our students get applied experience while they're in the program. And they do an internship over the summer. So when they're applying for an internship, they can say, we've done 2 or 3 client projects already. They get an internship. And then by the time they go in the job market, they have 2 years of experience as consultants, as junior consultants, but as consultants. And that helps them stand out. One nice thing with initial experience too is you learn what you like and you don't like. Maybe you like working for one company, maybe you like working as an external consultant for a lot of companies. Some experience helps you decide what you want. If you want to have a specialty area like I did for organizational culture, you can figure that out. But I think probably the biggest thing to keep in mind is you don't need to figure it all out at once. What you do, and this isn't just for being a consultant, by the way, this is for all of you as you go out into the world. Take a job. If you don't like it, find a different job. It's not that every job needs to be this massive step up or this really straight path to what your goal is. If you're, whatever your goals are, that's great. I want to support and encourage that, but think about your career trajectory is a winding road to that goal, and that goal may change. So instead of thinking like this is the perfect job, one way to think about this, at least I really firmly believe, is think about what a job is going to teach you. Because I'm sorry to break it to you, but you're not done learning. If you get a job that will teach you a new skill or let you apply skills you have, that's pretty good. Because once you're done with that job, you can go to someone else and say, now I know this or I've done this. So all these experiences build on one another. If there's a job that you go to that you think, I'm going to be really comfortable, I know how to do all of this, don't take that job. Take something that's going to challenge you and force you to keep learning. That's how you'll grow in your career. Soapbox on that over, although there's probably going to be more, just a warning. So like kind of that was very businessy, right? That was not traditional psychology as you may have experienced it thus far a whole lot. We're going to circle back, especially later today or in the second video when we do research methods. Psychology is a science, so we don't go with just our gut instincts. We do research as the foundation for what we practice. We publish these in journals, Journal of Applied Psychology, etc. We hold meetings. So the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, or SIOP, we have a meeting every year where we have posters and talks. And for me, it's basically just a really great way to see old friends. And it's just, we're basically eating and drinking our way through wherever we are. Historically, the last couple of years, I don't really even go to posters or presentations anymore. I just meet with research collaborators and friends. And it's great because you can just basically sit at the hotel bar and have a parade of people come and chat with you. And you don't have to go anywhere, and you can have a nice frosty beverage in your hand. That's neither here nor there. So the publication of papers is really challenging. They go through what's called peer review. People that you don't know, necessarily, you don't know who they are at least, it's blinded, look over your work and provide suggestions to make it better or to decide whether or not the journal should publish it. What this does is it makes sure that, at least in the good journals, that the work we're doing is good and rigorous. That way we can trust it when we go out and apply it into the world. So it's a competitive and difficult process, but there's utility in it being competitive and difficult because it makes us better when we try to do these things. This is an old member survey. Actually, we had a new member survey come out just a few weeks ago. I don't have the updated numbers in front of me. I'm not going to look right now because I'm recording. But I have psychologists, 39% are in universities, so a little less than half are academics. And then the rest of people are in different types of consulting, whether it's external consulting at 25%, internal consulting at 17%, government or other, which people picked as an option. this is the weird piece here. These are mean salary numbers. I really want to encourage all of you not to, if you're interested in biopsychology, to go into it because you're interested in the topics we'll talk about this semester. I don't do it for the money, but I will say, especially in consulting, you are paid better than many people with psychology degrees, and you can get a job with a master's degree. You don't need a PhD, so that is appealing. I can tell you right now, they say 101,000 for university or college. I can absolutely guarantee you that I do not make anywhere close to that. But it's still not too bad, and certainly going like external consulting especially can be very lucrative. So we have a professional identity. Biopsychologists, more so than some other types of psychologists, I think, view ourselves as more similar than different. We all have similar training. We all meet through PSYOP, and we have other organizations too. Academy of Management. Those are mostly folks who teach in business schools. The Society of Occupational Health Psych is getting very, very popular. Europe has their own IO thing, but we all, I think, identify as biopsychologists more so than anything else. And I know I certainly do. Okay, let's take a brief trip down the history of biopsychology. And I know for some people, the history part isn't that exciting. For some people, you really like it. I happen to really like it. And I really like talking about the history of IO because it makes sense. It's not just, I don't want to say, oh, this person did this, and then this person did this. That's not that exciting. What I'll do in this piece is I'm going to talk about how historical events affected the start and the development of IO psychology as a profession. So IO started in the early 1900s. There was some personality testing, intelligence testing applied to the workplace, but it wasn't that well known. But then, as we progressed into World War I, all of a sudden, IO psychologists became really important. I can guarantee probably never read about this in a history book, but if you think about it, so World War I, 1914, 1918, mostly fought by people in Europe, and in Europe, the US entered the war in 1917. And we mobilized about 1 million men at the time to go to Europe to fight on the front lines in a year. So there was a draft at the time. 1 million people were drafted, and not everybody was sent to the front line to live in the trenches and have a really horrible existence. Some people were pilots. Some people were cooks. Some people were doctors, right? And with a draft, it's hard to sort out who's going to be good at what sometimes, right? You just have a mass of people, and you have to figure out what they're going to be suited for. So IO psychology had a big growth in World War I because we had to develop tests to figure out what people were suited for what jobs, when we basically created 1 million new jobs in a really short span of time and then shipped everyone over to Europe. So World War I was the first big piece with mass testing. And it kind of put us on the map. Between the world wars, psychology was helping businesses with efficiency. We were really focused on that personnel selection aspect. How can we assess people, like their intelligence or their aptitude, and then put them in good jobs? It was only in the 1930s that we started focusing on the social aspects in the workplace. And this is a really cool set of studies. Hawthorne, a guy named Hawthorne, was asked to go to a company to see how the lighting affected productivity. So this started off as a very eyeside efficiency-based thing. They wanted to see, did low, medium, or high amounts of lighting in this factory make people work more? So they did a study, like any good psychologist does. One day they had low lighting, one day they had medium, one day they had high. What did they find out? Well, as it turns out, they found all 3 different sets of lighting had higher productivity than they had previously. And this sort of baffled them. This was confusing to them. They said, well, we expected maybe one of these to work better, but not all of them. And then they thought about it. And bear with me here, picture this. You're on the factory floor, you're making widgets, and one day you look up and something, they're messing with the lighting, and that's kind of weird. They didn't explain why, they're just messing with the lighting, so you're confused. But you look up and there's a catwalk, there's like a ledge, and you see some guy in a lab coat looking down at you, making notes. The lights change again, guy makes more notes. There's a lot of people in lab coats, and they're all staring at you, and you can't figure out quite what's going on. What do? You work harder, because this is deeply unsettling, right? You're like, why are these people staring at me? They're messing with the lights. Like, something's not great here. I need to do my job better so I don't get fired. That's what everybody thought. So this idea of this social watching came up. And it's a fun study to talk about because I think it's kind of funny, but it more importantly introduced the idea that the situation matters. It's not just about efficiency, it's about having the influence of other people and situations matters in IO psychology as well. Seems really obvious now, but at the time it was pretty groundbreaking. That was the Hawthorne study in the 30s. Then in World War II, we instituted the Army alpha and beta testing, so more advanced aptitude testing. Same as we did in World War I, but just we had 2 decades to refine it. Put millions of people back into the service and put them in jobs that would work for them. The next really big milestone in the history of biopsychology, so again, all these things, besides Hawthorne, it's not like, oh, this one person did this study and blah, 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 like some other areas of psychology. No, these are world events that biopsychology was able to contribute to and evolved as a result. And the next one was the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. Before 1960, you could legally discriminate against whoever you wanted. There's no consequence for it. And this you've heard about in history class. Then the Civil Rights Movement came. And at the time, predominantly African Americans wanted, rightfully, to have their rights be equal to that of white people. And since then, since the Civil Rights Movement, this kicked off a lot of things. Equality for gender being another big one, for religion, for sexual orientations become big. But this idea that the legal system protects against discrimination. You can't not hire someone because of how they look, which makes sense, but it took this movement to get us there. And all of a sudden, IO psychology had something to contribute again too. We could see if any group, whatever minority group we're talking about, and minority I mean specifically anyone that wasn't a white male, because that was the dominant and is the dominant group, we could look to see if there's adverse impact in hiring. And I want to be clear, this isn't affirmative action. This is just saying, proportionally, are you somewhat diverse? So here's a fun example. My advisor in grad school was doing work for the city of Birmingham on the county, Jefferson County in Alabama is where Birmingham is. Birmingham is a predominantly African-American city, but they were redoing all their job descriptions for everyone that worked for the county. And he found some pockets that were like, you guys are gonna get sued. Like you're not doing this well at all. So he went to a couple of fire stations and everyone there was a white male in a city that's predominantly not. And he's like, okay, well, how did you guys get hired? Were there other people in the hiring pool? Like, he wasn't, it's not accusatory. It's just like, how did this come about? They were all cousins. Everyone in the fire station was related and got the job because they were related. That's obviously kind of an issue for a government job. If it's your own company, do whatever you want. But for a government job, that didn't fly. So it was an application of like, hey, let's use some IO psychology to hire people in a legally defensible way. To this day, IO psychologists serve as expert witnesses in court cases. And then the other big one was, after civil rights, was the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this just made sure that companies and organizations had to make reasonable accommodations for disabled people. For example, you could no longer say, like, I'm not going to hire you because you're in a wheelchair. Now organizations would have to put in a ramp so you could get up. Like, obviously, if it's a manual labor job or something, that's different. But if it's an office job, organizations now had to put in like a ramp or an elevator or something so that people with disabilities were able to have the same access to jobs. We're coming to the end of the lecture here. Thank you all for bearing with me. I hope this is of some interest to you. I really hope it is, because we're going to be talking about it for a while. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few other quick points. IO psychology is really growing around the world, not just in the US. A lot of consulting firms now work internationally. Some old companies like DDI went from being Developmental Decisions Incorporated to Developmental Decisions International, and so on and so forth. And there's more, one big thing is there's more graduate programs around the world. The UK, Australia, New Zealand, and the Netherlands in particular have really, really big and good IO programs. The research that we look at differs a little bit from program to program and country to country. Different countries have different emphases, I'd say. The US really cares about leadership and performance appraisal and selection, which makes sense because culturally we're very individualistic. We're very much into a meritocracy. Let's evaluate who's the winner here and who gets the job. Whereas in companies that are less individualistic, like Germany's a good example, they focus on job stress, motivation training, and the work environment. So you see, and we'll talk about culture a little bit later, but you see these sort of interesting trends of how cultural values reflect what IO psychologists do in that country. We kind of covered this before, how to become an IO psychologist. And kind of the last thing that I'll hit is these 6 ethical principles from the APA. We are psychologists. We don't necessarily belong to the APA, but we adhere to these, right? You have to be competent. And this isn't just like you have to know what you're doing. If you're going to go work for a client, you have to know what you're doing if you're going to sell them your service. You can't just say, oh, yeah, I can totally do that, and then not know how to do it. You have to have integrity. You have to be honest with your clients. You have a responsibility to the profession and to the science to do rigorous work, to do it well, to do it right, while respecting other people. You have to be concerned for others' welfare, and social responsibility comes into play here too. This is all to say, you can't just worry. If you're going to go practice as an IO psychologist, your clients matter, but also so does your integrity and your honesty. You sometimes might run into a situation where a client wants a particular type of result. Way back when I did some consulting work for a large insurance company, they were reorganizing one of their departments, and they basically said, let's develop a new performance rating system for us, and because we have to let some people go. So we'll pick the people on the bottom. We developed this we spent months developing this really rigorous performance system, only for at the end, we ranked people based on that. And at the end, we're sitting with the vice presidents, and they basically said, well, this person's rated well, but we don't like them. So they're going to get fired over this person that's not rated as well. And we had to be like, you're the client. This is your organization. You can obviously do what you want, but we strongly disagree with this, and we will not support this decision. If the person getting fired sued or something, we would provide and say, they didn't follow our procedure. This isn't legally defensible. So that's the story, just to say, like, you have to be ethical. You have to think about what your ethics are, because at some point they will probably get challenged, and you have to be able to handle that when it comes up. I think I was a second-year grad student or something, and I was like, oh, this is not good. I'm in way over my head. but fortunately we had more senior people to deal with it. So Takeaways. Biopsychology, we covered what it is, what we do, and where we work. We talked about it as both a science and a practice and how a lot of biopsychologists do a bit of both. We talked about briefly how to become them, and then very briefly how we act around the world. So the things that I want you to come away with from this lecture is just an idea of generally what biopsychology is, and all these things we talked about, we're going to go into more detail later. So this is just setting the stage and hopefully getting some of you engaged and interested to hear more. So that's it for this lecture. I will see you all soon. Thank you and take care.